two.
Well, greetings everyone, and greetings from Ireland, Cork City in Ireland. My name is James Desmond, and we're all here on the gracious invitation of Mr. Paul Beckwith, who has asked us to join him for an AMA, Ask Me Anything, on ask me anything on focusing on your own personal experiences with climate catastrophe and/or extreme weather events. So the question is open to ask me anything, and Paul has graciously he given us his time here. And sorry again, apologies for the delay, Paul. And apologies, I'm slightly a bit nervous as well. Basically, Paul is, he's got, he's a physicist, climate scientist. He's also a professor, a part-time professor at Ottawa, Canada. And he's, for me, I suppose, is my inspiration a long time now, because for me, I think Paul has always given the reality of our situation based on from peer-reviewed literature. That is, he's able to break down and boil down for the average layperson to understand, and he does that very well in his YouTube videos. And a lot of people, first and foremost, they find it hard to understand the technical talk about climate and global warming, but others are they're, I suppose, unable to access the actual information. A lot of the stuff Paul does is peer-reviewed literature, so therefore it's only accessible by professors and so on. There is a lot of information out there. Unfortunately, I suppose it is very, very, very well kept. It's there, but it's not. It's very well kept out of sight, if you ask. My opinion, and this probably one of my greatest concerns is the fact that people's misconceptions of global warming or climate change, or what that means to them, and the idea that maybe for most people it's something that's long term down the road, and they don't need to be worrying about that now because they have too much pressing things and urgency things to be worrying about themselves from day to day. And that is true. A lot of people are struggling to get through, the day or even the week, and they feel they don't have time to, to be concerned or worried about something that they think is happening in the distant future. So that is probably one of my main concerns. And the other concern then as well is that the systems, because people's lack of understanding about the systems and their, the connections between the systems, it's very easy to say, oh, global warming. We've all heard of global warming since the 1980s, if you think about it. So much so that we just, it's not news anymore to people, unless those are the, as we're talking about here now, those who are being affected by extreme events. And that's a lot of that's happening around the globe now at the moment as we speak. And unfortunately, people are preoccupied with other matters, again, their own personal matters and other global issues, that they don't see the global warming as a primary concern, and they don't understand the reality of the situation. So here in Ireland now, for example, I would say, and I'm actually going to apologise now. I won't start. I'll leave it with Paul, because Paul is going to start off with his experience of extreme weather in Ottawa in Canada. And I apologise again, Paul. It's great to have you here with us. I really, really do appreciate it. We all appreciate it that you give us your time. And yeah, I suppose my question is really, well, for yourself anyway, I'll leave you to talk about your own experiences with it, and then I'll pose a question after.
Yeah. Thank you, James. So, hello, everybody. Thanks for joining. Sorry for the hiccups. This is the first AMA that we're trying, so we're going to continue to do these every so often, usually based on some of my videos, I think, or on events that are happening around the world. So we should get the process ironed out ahead of time so that there's not delays in future. But anyway, thanks again. So I thought that it would be interesting, not just for me to go on and talk, but to answer as many questions as you have. That's how these Ask Me Anything things work. So you can, we have a topic, but if you have other pressing issues on climate, then go ahead and feel free to ask them. They don't have to be related to what we've said we're going to talk about. So very open that way. So I guess the question I'm thinking of is, how is climate catastrophe, how is climate change, how is our extreme weather event affecting you personally? So I thought I'd mention a few things that are happening. Of course, I'm up in Canada. I'm at about 45 degrees north latitude in Ottawa. So some of the things that we've experienced in Ottawa, apart from, of course, we've had a change in precipitation patterns. We've had an increase in heating, in heat events. A report just came out, I think, from Statistics Canada. Canada overall was about 5.1, 5.2 degrees Celsius warmer than the previous average. So Canada being a northern country, we know that as you move away from the equator closer to the poles, you get temperature amplification, and the warming is much, much greater. Also over land, the warming is much greater than it is over the oceans or the global average. Also, if you live at elevation, you live at some altitude, the warming is accelerated then compared to sea level global average warming. So nobody experiences the global average temperature, right? We're all in different regions, and depending on the terrain and the sort of local regional climates, we get different effects. So we've had a number of storms that we haven't seen before in the Ottawa region. Just a few years ago, we had a series of tornadoes coming very close to Ottawa. In fact, coming from the west side of Ottawa, crossing the Ottawa River, going into Gatineau in Quebec. We had a cluster of about 3 or 4 tornadoes causing damage to some houses, of course, along the route. I think the largest was an EF3. After those occurred, I went and surveyed the damages, and they were quite severe. I've had experience with tornadoes because I've been storm chasing in the US, Tornado Alley, for about 4 or 5 different times in the past. Usually rent a car with a meteorologist friend and go on a week or so trip to Tornado Alley to spot the tornadoes and see the storms and study them. But this is quite a unique thing for Ottawa to experience. Along with the tornadoes, we've had very, very high wind events, straight line wind events called derechos, where you have mostly it's from a cold front coming through, very, very hot and humid temperatures, and then the cold front barrels through, cold air is denser than warm air, so it moves very quickly, drives the warm air carrying moisture up, creating a whole frontal series of straight line winds, which can exceed tornado strength winds and cause widespread damage. So we had that just south of Ottawa. About 2 years ago, there was a very strong derecho event, brought down all kinds of trees, also brought down trees right in Ottawa. There's a dog park I go to, and that was hit hard. Pretty much every large tree was knocked over. This is 2 years ago, so you can see how the forest is trying to recover now. And it takes a long time for that to happen. Of course, everybody's experiencing, heat waves, and, associated with some of these heat waves, we're also getting some extreme cold spells. And I guess I call it weather whiplashing, where you go from one heat wave to a cold stretch back to another heat wave. And this can be very harmful, especially in the spring. So just a few years ago, we had extremely warm temperatures in the early spring in Ontario. So the buds came out, and then there was very, very sharp, abrupt cold spell lasting for about a week or so, which killed all the buds. And that destroyed, for example, caused $100 million of damage to the apple growing farmers in Ontario. So those sort of things are happening. This weather whiplashing, where you go from one extreme to the other. I filmed a video about a week ago of torrential rains that hit Ottawa. We're getting more and more torrential type rains, leading to sort of localized flooding. The video I thought was very interesting because, you know, the roads basically turn into rivers. And then, of course, that water has to go somewhere and it congregates in pools in the lower parts, causing flooding. Insurance companies are well aware of the types of flooding that we're now getting in Canada. Forever, the biggest payout from insurance companies for home insurance has been for fire damage. Okay, that was always the largest by far. Well, for the last 3 years, that has been exceeded by flood damages now. So flood is the biggest payout. And flood can also, if you don't get the water out of your house, if you don't dry out your basement that's flooded very, very quickly, within days, you can get mold starting to form. And then mold is one of the worst things that can happen to any homeowner. So you know, there's mitigation steps that you can take if you get flooding. You know, it could be the way the drainage is around the house. It could be, you know, if you're in a low-lying area, if you're in the lowest part of the land and everybody else is higher around you, then there's not a whole lot you can do, you know, apart from maybe finding, you know, improving the drainage greatly and building maybe French drains or storm drains so the water can go deep into the earth. I mean, there's not a lot of choices. You're rather limited if you're sort of the lowest part of the city. We're getting ticks are becoming a problem here. They've been a problem. This is a record high year for ticks. You know, if you go, ticks basically feed off mice. So anywhere that mice might congregate, you need to be aware of the ticks, and a lot of them can carry Lyme disease, which can be a huge problem. So I got some sort of bite a couple weeks ago and it wouldn't heal. It caused inflammation, larger and larger inflammation. So I ended up, you know, I didn't know what it was, couldn't see a perforation. I was in tick country, thought it could have been a tick. So I ended up getting it looked at and have been taking antibiotics for 10 days for that. And it kind of cleared it up. But there's a lot of these sort of things going around. I'm a scuba diver. I've dived years ago when I lived in California for a couple of years. I dived on Catalina Island on the kelp bed. There was like kelp forests all around the island. And I've been told by friends that are still there that these kelp beds have completely vanished. They no longer, these kelp forests of that part of the world are no longer there. The water's too warm. Predatory things have changed. They're just not supported anymore. Also, the water is so warm that the pelicans off California this year, for example, are lacking a food supply because they can only dive down about 3, 4, 5, 6 feet, you know, a couple of meters to get the fish in the surface waters. But because the surface waters are too hot off the coast, there's no fish there. The fish go deeper. The pelican can't access them. So they're starving basically off California. So these cascading effects in the biosphere are very important things we often don't think about. And of course, you know, the marine heat waves around the world are causing the coral reefs to vanish. I've scuba dived on beautiful coral reefs, and they're becoming, you know, an endangered species. We won't have them on this planet for much longer, the way things are going. So those are just some of the things that have affected me directly. Of course, you know, the big thing for climate change is the effects on the global food supply. You know, there's situations where the jet streams can be set up and get stuck in place and, you know, hit the food growing regions of the Northern Hemisphere extremely hard. That would lead to global food shortages and price spikes, et cetera. So there's all different levels of effects on people. I mean, there's effects on our towns, there's effects on our employment, our livelihoods. There's also more global effects. You know, the flooding is becoming a huge issue in large parts of the US. We saw this massive flooding in parts of Europe just in the last couple of days. Yes, climate change does occur in Florida, despite what the government is trying to say, the local state government, and they've had they had, I think, over 4 inches of rain in an hour in parts of southern Florida. They've had 20 inches over a few days. So it's there's an ongoing massive flooding event going on right now in southern Florida. And I think we're into the third day of that. So we're seeing, of course, these catastrophes are occurring around the planet. So I thought this would be an interesting session to, ask me anything you want, but, maybe just mention at the beginning of your question, how climate change has impacted you personally directly. It's affecting our psyche, it's affecting our emotions, it's affecting how we think, right? It's making lots of young people depressed, not wanting to have kids, not thinking we have much of a future. So there's all kinds of different effects that you might want to talk about, a little bit about how you've been personally affected.
Thanks very much, Paul. That was excellent. Again, as I said, your way of explaining things is so, it's unique, because the average person can understand exactly what you're talking about. Yeah, I'm eager to hear other people's questions, but I'll just give you, like, for myself anyway, briefly. Here in Ireland, I've always considered that we're in a kind of a unique position, because we kind of get the best of all the different,
Okay, sorry to interrupt, James. I mean, people are putting questions in the chat. So rather, if somebody can read those questions to me, that would help a lot, rather than me having to go through the chat myself.
Well, I will, of course, yeah. I just have a quick question, and based on my own experience, or people's experience here in Ireland, and well, Jamin can go out reading the questions in the chat. I wouldn't be able to see it with my own print. But my own question basically is, we have a cold spot out in the North Atlantic, just off the south coast of Iceland, and it's known there for a long time. And as you said, the oceans all over the world are warming up now. Yet the cold spot is still there. And as a result, what we're having and experiencing for the last couple of years now, we're increasing temperatures in the winter, increasing named storms. Like, we had 9 named storms in 11 days. Now it's actually officially started summer here, and it's 12 degrees. Yes, 14 degrees tomorrow. Anyway, the point I'm making is that it's the talks that the AMOC are supposed to be slowing down as well is having an effect.
Yeah. So this is called the global warming hole south of Greenland. It's an area, if you look at global temperature change on the planet, it's the one area that's where temperature has actually declined. The reason is the Gulf Stream would carry heat across to Europe and is no longer going through that region like it did, so that region is cooler. So this is an early warning signal, if you like, that the AMOC is significantly slowing down. We know that if the AMOC shuts off, we've got good data from paleo records. We know that Europe will cool significantly. Global average temperatures in Europe could drop, as high as 5 degrees Celsius, especially on the Atlantic coastal regions. If you go a bit further into northern Norway, could drop about 15, 20 degrees Celsius. That's the mean annual temperature. Basically, it's going to be very difficult to grow food in Europe. And people, will be in a deep freeze. And this, the AMOC, the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation, is showing signs that it's significantly, it's significantly reduced. It's about 30% weaker, over the last few decades. It's probably the reason why there's still sea ice in the Arctic in summers. I think there's a paper that's shown that without the AMOC slowing as much as it has, we probably would have already lost the Arctic sea ice by now. So this is a sort of a wild card in the system. Stefan Ramsdorf at the Potsdam Institute has devoted, I think, about 3 or 4 decades of his scientific work on looking at the AMOC. And he says, we just don't know enough about it. Like, it's a real wild card. It's slowing down significantly. If it has passes the threshold and shuts off, then basically the entire planet climate changes. The whole northern hemisphere cools relative to what it would be with a functioning AMOC. That heat has to go somewhere. That heat collects in the tropics. So the monsoons are forced southward. This band of rain and storms called the Intertropical Convergence Zone moves southward. So the monsoons could actually miss the regions where they hit and provide water for food supply and food growth for literally billions of people. The southern hemisphere warms significantly. We're already seeing a lot of warming in the southern hemisphere, and a collapse of the Antarctic sea ice is a result of that. So we're seeing these effects already of the AMOC slowing, and it's just when will it actually shut down? Will it be a shutdown? I mean, it all the time scales. It's all relative, right? Like if you look on a long-term time scale, a shutdown that even takes 10 years on human scales would seem instantaneous, on a longer time scale. So, when we're talking about abrupt change, I mean, a 30% drop in a few decades is a pretty major drop. If that continues over the next, decade or two, it basically stops functioning, reroutes at a lower latitudes, and I call it the mother of all tipping points. It basically affects climate significantly around the planet. And there's some interesting work that's been done recently in the last couple of weeks that has just come out, which I'll discuss in a new video fairly soon. So yeah, I mean, if with AMOC slowing, you'd expect Europe to have much colder temperatures, and that's also what we're seeing right now. So the signs are there. It's a real wild card in the climate system, the ocean currents. And of course, right, we're seeing record ocean temperatures in various spots, like in the North Atlantic, in the southern hemisphere. We're talking about 3, 4, 5 standard deviations warmer than normal. These marine heat waves that we're seeing in the tropics. Tropics are already heating significantly. These marine heat waves that we're seeing are having a huge detrimental effect on coral reefs. I mean, we're observing the destruction of all the coral reefs on the planet, maybe with the exception of some deep water corals. But it's on our watch. We're seeing this stuff happen. So maybe let's go to some of the questions. Who wants to read some questions in the chat?
Yeah, we've got some questions. We've got some questions in the chat. BJ had her hand up first, so I'll pass it to BJ. And then after that, we've got Mark 3 to be precise, followed by Michael, Peter, and James. Go ahead, BJ.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad you're here, Paul Beckwith. I'm in Central Texas, and we have hotter and hotter summers. And what the impact is, the trees are not getting watered. This is our second year drought. And so then when a wind comes, we're losing trees. And I recently took pictures around town of our trees and said, look, we're going to have to water more than just counting on the rain. We've also seen more wildlife in our small town of 14,000. So my question is, do you see an increase in people's understanding the connection between clearing? Because we have people still clearing land for more cattle, and the connection with climate in your area. In my area, people are not getting the connection. They go to barbecue places where there are stacks of lumber, to do barbecue.
Right.
So I'm just wondering about your connections. Do you feel like people are understanding that connection between consuming animals and climate change?
Well, yes. I mean, Texas has experienced a lot of extreme weather events, including, the heat waves and droughts that you're talking about, but also, also the tropical storms, the hurricanes that come ashore. I mean, you've had, cases where these storms have actually stalled out and dropped like 5 feet of rain in certain regions, and it's very prone to extremes. So one of the things with the heat waves and the drought is that, people are used to, heat and dryness in Texas, right? So even when there's exceptional heat and exceptional dryness that lasts for a long time, it takes a while for it to sink in that this is something unusual is happening, because people always try to, especially people that sort of deny or don't pay attention to climate change. They think, well, this is just something, this is just a weather pattern which will go away at some point. They don't realize that, I mean, things are definitely changing. Like there's a dry line, which is kind of where you get a lot of tornado formation. You get a clash of warm, dry air with colder air. You get humidity changes huge across this dry line. And I mean, that's part of Tornado Alley, basically, and that's shifted. I mean, the US is being hit by huge numbers of tornadoes, but they seem to be moving to the east and northward, right? So you might actually be getting few of them in your region. I'm not sure. But so there's lots of these shifts going on. And that's why it's important to look at the kind of the big picture. And I think more people that are meteorologists that are on TV and, doing weather reports and so on, more of those people are getting trained and getting a better understanding on climate. And maybe that's a way, if they say, well, these droughts are really bad. Yeah, we've had droughts and heat waves in Texas that are really bad. Trees are dying. But, here, if they kind of mix it, not just have a weather analysis or report, but talk about some of the trends that are happening, show some plots of temperature changing over the last, say, 100 years or 50 years or 40 years in Texas. When there's the droughts and the heat wave extreme, some of them are way off the charts. They're way beyond anything that you've experienced in Texas before. So these sort of things, just showing some of this data, I think is very important. And then people say, well, wait a minute, something going on here? Like what's going on? And it may affect things, because if a drought is long enough and lasts, if there's no water, people can't live there, right? So where do people get their water from? If they're not getting it from precipitation, there's some buffer from groundwater, digging wells deeper and deeper and deeper. Or if you live near a body of water, desalination plants, like people really need to start paying attention and thinking, well, how can we sustain ourselves where we're living, right? And this will affect migration patterns, because people from elsewhere think, oh, I don't want to move to that region. There's no water. It's way too hot. I mean, some people right now are very concerned that cities like Phoenix and so on, the temperatures will be super hot. I mean, the forecast for places like Phoenix are off the charts now, for the next week, for the next month, for the summer, right? So how will, I mean, so the question is that city sustainable? I mean, if it gets too unbearable, then people will move elsewhere, and we can talk about parts of the planet that could eventually head to become uninhabitable. And David Wallace Wells wrote a book with that very title on, so there's lots of information out there, but if people don't read the books or they don't listen to the reports or whatever, they can kind of keep it out of their minds, but only for so long, I think. And then they start kind of wondering, what's going on. So anyway, good question. Thank you.
All right. The next question is from Mark 3, who's not on video. And Mark, did you want to pose your question directly, or do you want me to read it?
No, it's me. It's me.
You're also Mark 3. Okay, very good.
Yeah, I signed multiple times because I was doing the check-in room and this one.
Yeah.
So yeah, I can just summarize quickly. Paul, thank you for coming. It's been a few weeks or months. We're very honored to have you here. We have some pretty big thinkers and some pretty big plans, and want to galvanize your efforts in terms of how climate change has personally affected me. Here in Alberta, up here in Edmonton, Forest fires last year were so bad, we had hanging smoke much longer than normal. And people realized that the fires were worse than normal, even people who didn't believe in climate change. Also, I was an ice road trucker for a while, and one of the things that convinced a man that I knew, an older man, that climate change was real, was the Frontier Trail heading up to Yellowknife is really windy and bumpy. And I asked him, why did you make the road so dangerous? And he said it wasn't. He said we built it on permafrost, and the permafrost is melting. And they thought that would never happen back in the 1960s and 70s. So he was convinced just by that. Nothing in the news, nothing else, just his experience of the permafrost changed his mind. And I would say the last thing is I was at the food bank here in Alberta, and they were thinking about seed diversity. And they're going around to all the community gardens here in Edmonton to try and give them extra seeds, because there's a concern and an overuse of the food bank as the economy collapses and further distracts people away from the climate crisis, because they're just trying to hold their own lives together. So all of these things have inspired us here at the University of Alberta to try and do many things at once with a single project. And it has to do with this Regenitech group from this documentary called Need to Grow. And they said there's going to be a soil problem on top of all of this in the next 50 years. And so we thought, well, we're going to try and make the University of Alberta the first campus that is not meat with vegan options, but a vegan campus with meat options, and then supply the campus with this grow-up station, this biodome, where they use biochar and a hydroponic setup with algae to do something like 3 years of growth, organic growth from composting, no chemical fertilizers, no pesticides, and do this all in 3 months. And we thought, okay, we can provide students on our campus in these student kitchens to cook gourmet vegan food, to convince people to go vegan, and then work with the food bank to build these these biodomes, these EPL lodges in every community league in our city, so that we can grow even foreign crops like coffee in these hydroponic setups in record time with more nutritionally dense food. And we have 100 community leagues here. So apparently it makes profit within 2 years, $4 million, and they're very quick to build. And if we inspired other cities to follow this, maybe we could also reduce our carbon footprint massively by not transporting so many goods internationally. So what do you think of that? Do you know about these Regenitech Need to Grow power lodges? Do you believe in the biochar setup? And would you ever help do a proof of concept at somewhere like the University of Alberta?
Yeah, no, these are all great initiatives. And, we never hear in the rest of Canada, we probably in the world too, we don't hear about these good projects going on. I mean, we hear about your premier, we hear about the climate war room, or the energy war room in Edmonton that just closed down. And this was formed, I think, in 2019 to spread the views of the energy industry, the oil industry, et cetera, and to try to downplay climate change, I think, and attack climate science. So we hear of things like this. Of course, the thing, the Fort McMurray, projects and which are some of the worst emissions, worst polluting ways to extract oil from, you're taking it out of asphalt, basically, or tar. So we hear way too many of those things and not enough of the good things like what your groups are doing. So I think spreading it among the universities, I don't know if you've looked at collaborating with, say, the University of Guelph comes to mind, Trent University. If you go to some of the universities that are, have strong agricultural programs that are in agricultural regions. I mean, one of my sons just graduated undergrad from Trent University, and they have, they do a lot of work with soils and agricultural work, and he's actually studying soils, and he'll be going to Fort McMurray in a few months if the fires hold off, to collect soil samples and around that region. So there's lots of good work being done. And you know, a good friend of my wife's, a soil scientist, and runs a big, huge farm in Ecuador, on the side of a mountain. You know, he's rejuvenated the soils there, and so there's lots of different things that people are doing, and you know, I just made a note to you know, you know, do some videos to try to promote some of this good work that's being done. You know, it's funny because most of my work is on, you know, the peer-reviewed science of what's happening with the climate. It's not so much with the solutions. And it's kind of funny because whenever I do a video to promote some sort of solutions, people, you know, say, oh, this is just hopium or what else, but whatever, you know, terms they want to use. So it's kind of funny. And then I go, you know, I mean, I'm not swayed by that type of thing. Obviously, you know, I want to put out there what I think is the most important at the time, and you know, cover lots of different topics. So great work. Thanks for bringing it up.
All right, Melissa has her hand up, followed by Peter. Go ahead, sweetheart.
Hi, Paul. Thank you for being here. Yeah, it's funny you started talking about solutions because that was my question in the chat was, do you think there are solutions for cooling the planet? Do we have time to cool the planet? And is that going to help change these weather patterns and change the climate? Can we get back to restoring the climate to a more stable, balanced climate?
Yeah, yeah, I mean, we've caused a tremendous amount of damage. It's like you know, we're in this machine moving full speed ahead over the cliff. But you know, it doesn't mean we you know, I've often talked about what I call the three-legged bar stool. You know, we need to slash fossil fuel emissions. There's no question, and you know, we need to, you know, right now, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and all the countries, when they talk about their climate plans, they talk about net zero emissions, which implies that we find ways to remove carbon from the atmosphere ocean system, carbon dioxide removal, right? That's another sort of leg of the bar stool. But I think that we're going to, I'm pretty convinced that we're going to try some other methods to you know, the jargon is solar radiation management. I prefer SOS, solar optimization systems or solutions. One of the things that we're finding out with the reduction of sulfur in marine shipping fuels is that the climate is much more sensitive to sulfur in the atmosphere than mainstream science understands. James Hansen is once again pioneering the work on how sensitive the climate system is to a doubling of CO2 equivalent. You know, it's much more sensitive than mainstream science thinks. And by the same token, the effect of the aerosols to block sunlight, that's a direct effect, and also to generate low-level clouds, is far greater than mainstream science has understood up to now. There is science that is being done that is catching up to Hansen's work, which is showing that he's once again correct on this. So what this means is that there is, you know, if somebody, some billionaire on the planet puts sulfur dioxide into the upper atmosphere, we know the planet will cool significantly. You know, we know this from volcanic eruptions that occur. So, you know, if we're smart about it, we can, you know, prevent some of the massive heat waves and stuff that are in the pipes, you know, that we're going to be we're experiencing now, but we're only scratching the surface. They're going to get a lot worse in the near-term future. I mean, the rate of global warming has accelerated. It's doubled since 2010. Right up from 1970 to 2010, our planet was warming about 0.18 degrees Celsius per decade on average. Now, since 2010, we've been warming at double that, 0.36 degrees Celsius per decade, blowing through the 1.5C target, you know, rapidly approaching the 2C target. and we're all suffering as a result. And you know, I think that what's going to happen, the biggest risk, the biggest weakness for humanity is our global food supply, our ability to grow enough food for people. So when when food prices start to spike because of global food shortages, at least we have the buffer of reducing food waste. Food will get so expensive, nobody will waste any food whatsoever. It'll become gold. And then you know, and then we see, well, do we understand technologies enough to try to reduce some of the solar radiation that's absorbed by the surface of the earth, and then we can actually, you know, if the answer is yes, then we can actually try to stabilize the Earth's climate system. I mean, the thing is, inadvertently, we've been changing the climate forever, right? I mean, so people that say, oh, well, we're going to screw things up. Well, everything sort of happened by chance. I mean, China reduced emissions because it was killing millions of people per year. So they reduced sulfur emissions. They reduced it 70% between 2006 when it peaked and 2017. Because of their communist system, they could just say to companies and industry, you reduce sulfur or you just shut down, right? I mean, we can't do that in the West, but they did it there, and they reduced sulfur 70%. So therefore, the sulfur flowing off into the Pacific was much less. Therefore, more solar radiation would warm up the oceans because the sulfur dioxide acts as little mirrors, a direct effect, blocking some of the sunlight. But more powerful by a factor of 5, 6, 7 times is the little sulfur acts as cloud condensation nuclei, creating low-level clouds, which then cause cooling. So remove that sulfur, you get greatly accelerated warming downwind of where you're producing it. You know, so China did that. You know, we had an acid rain problem in North America. That was sulfur coming out of smokestacks. We got technologies to remove the sulfur, scrubbers in the smokestacks to solve the acid rain problem. But what we did and didn't realize we were doing at the time was we were causing great warming of the Atlantic Ocean downwind of North America. Then that technology went to Europe and they employed the technology, and then that affected China and the Pacific downwind. And just recently, it's all the marine shipping fuels, you know, the reduction of sulfur in marine shipping fuels legislated by the International Maritime Organization. In 2020, they reduced it from 7% down to 0.5% sulfur content. So now there's a lot less sulfur over the ocean, a lot less particle generation, and great warming of the ocean. So we're doing all of these things, not knowing that we're doing them. So, you know, the whole idea of, you know, shutting down anything, you know, we're going to lose the global food supply the way we're heading. We're going to have global food shortages the way we're heading. So we're going to allow this to happen and just watch it happen. You know, I can't predict the future. You know, how humans are very unpredictable, you know, collectively, you know, governments, what they're doing. I mean, we're heading to, you know, as things get worse and worse, there's more and more migration around the world. People are migrating to different areas. And this leads to a backlash against the migration. And this leads to right-wing governments who then chop climate policy. So there's all of these different feedbacks. I highly recommend Timothy Lenton's paper, Global Tipping Points 2023, which came out just for December of last year, because he talks about a lot of the tipping points, not just in the Earth system, but also in the human system, you know, in human behavior. So.
Yeah, and I just wanted to also ask you about marine cloud brightening. And the other point I wanted to make is you talked about the coral reefs dying. Of course, that's not the only species that are now endangered or extinct, but we don't get those animals back. And that, of course, impacts the whole ecosystem and the web that we're part of. So how do you have hope? I don't know if hope is a word, or faith that humanity will also have in French, they say prise de conscience, wake up and have consciousness that how our habitation and the way we live, our lifestyles are impacting all the other species that we share the planet with. And what do we do about that? Because we can't put squirrels and raccoons in little freezer, keep clothing that keeps them cool, right? Or the trees. I just don't see a planet that we can live on if we lose all these different species.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's still going from bad to worse right now. But there is things can turn on a dime if you like. Like if all we need is a president, it won't be Biden, won't be the other guy. We need a president to say, the climate is so bad, it's causing so much, it's destroying our country as well as the world. Let's take that U.S. military budget and let's look at let's just go completely to renewables. Let's maybe some nuclear thrown in. I don't know. Clean, not fossil fuels. Get off fossil fuels. Let's remove carbon. Figure out how to remove carbon at scale from the atmosphere, ocean, and let's try some deployment of some solar radiation, solar optimizing systems. Cool the planet. Hey, it works over here. Let's expand it. Right? I mean, we can do these things. We have the money. We're just directing it in the wrong places. We're directing it to kill people and the planet, and not to because. So I don't know if people are starving in mass numbers of people around the world, in rich, Western countries. Maybe that will wake people up. Maybe not. Maybe not. I mean, it's just it remains to be seen how we act, but there'll be a lot fewer of us on the planet in the near term, the way we're heading, for sure.
All right, good stuff. Oh, sorry. Next up, we've got Peter McKinnon, followed by a quick question from Kurt, and then on to James Finch. Go ahead, Peter.
Thanks, and hi, Paul.
Hi.
I have a two-part question. You somewhat answered part of it, the second part just a moment ago. But first off, it's about causes. And I'm just wondering, from your perspective, what you see as the primary interhemispheric forcing functions that are being shared by the polar regions and how they're affecting the global climate. And the second part of my question is, in fact, what are your views about geoengineering? But you have said something. So what else could you add to geoengineering if you haven't already said so? Thank you.
Yeah. So the Earth system, of course, there is lots of connections across the equator from pole to pole, because if you look in the paleo records, often there's been a seesaw behavior. So if the Arctic goes really, really cold, then the Antarctic will be warmer, and vice versa. We've seen those type of shifts in the paleo records. We've got a certain amount of heat on the planet right now, and that's not going to change enormously, right, over a short period of time. But where it's acting on the planet can change very, very rapidly. So this is what an AMOC shutdown would do. It would basically, the Arctic would get very, very cold, because that heat would no longer be carried north in the ocean currents and released to the atmosphere. So therefore, that heat doesn't disappear. That heat accumulates in the tropics, and it also makes the southern hemisphere much, much warmer, right? So you can see that sort of so the ocean currents are really the kind of mechanism that connects the hemispheres. Also, the atmospheric wind patterns, but less so, because when we talk about the Rossby waves, they're circumventing, in the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere. We have had cases where the jet stream goes so far south that it connects across the equator into the southern hemisphere. We have, but still, the air density is so much lower compared to the ocean currents, but the ocean currents are moving that much slower. But generally, the connection between the hemispheres is through those the global circulation of the ocean currents, and that does cause some sort of seesaw or oscillating effect between the two poles. So, what surprised people since about 2015, the Antarctic's really surprised people. When I say people, scientists, it's just, up until 2015, the sea ice around Antarctica was growing about 1.5% per decade for many decades. And then it basically dropped off a cliff 2015 for a couple of years, recovered a bit, went even lower, set new record lows. And of course, that's a concern because that means that the melt rates of Antarctica will greatly increase if there's no sea ice buttressing the ice. So that's really surprised a lot of people. If I'll think about that in terms of the AMOC slowing down and the Arctic getting colder. Maybe we're seeing early signs of this sort of gyration. Maybe the slowing of the AMOC in the North Atlantic is actually contributing to that extra warming effect around in the southern hemisphere of the waters, resulting in less sea ice and things. So, I'm always trying to look at the connections. It's too early to tell, what's going on for sure. And then the geoengineering, I think the term geoengineering has been kind of destroyed because a lot of people in the public, they hear geoengineering and they do a knee-jerk reaction, chemtrails, right? Yeah. Right. And they've kind of destroyed the whole thing. That's why I think most people try to separate it. And I mean, there's the two main things. You want to remove CO2 and other greenhouse gases, right? Greenhouse gas removal. If you can figure out, so people are looking at direct air capture, they're looking at different ways. I mean, just growing more trees, stimulating phytoplankton growth with maybe iron seeding or whatever, the missing nutrient, things like that to capture more carbon. Those are all implied in the idea of net zero. Whenever you hear governments talking about net zero, this is what they're talking about. And they don't say, oh, we want to geoengineer and we want to remove carbon, That's what net zero is. You never hear them coming clean and being honest with what they're actually talking about to achieve net zero. And then not much more controversial is the idea of the SRM. But we know that the climate system is much more sensitive to something like sulfur emissions than we ever thought before, mainstream science-wise. This is actually a very good thing because it means that we have a very powerful technique to cause some cooling back so that we don't all fry to a crisp on this planet, right? Rather than let that happen, we have means to actually cause cooling. And we've known forever because when volcanoes go off, we get cooling. I mean, a large volcano, we can get half a degree or degree of cooling for 3, 4, 5 years, right? It's a huge effect. So, the more work that, the Hansen's been leading the way with this sulfur stuff for years, but now I'm seeing other publications in science, peer-reviewed science coming out on sulfur. And interestingly, and not surprising to me, a lot of them don't even reference Hansen's work. They talk about it as if it's some novel thing that they've just come up with. So interestingly. So yeah, I'm saying, that we're already doing geoengineering when we talk about carbon dioxide removal. And governments are all for that. That's half of the effect. The other half is SRM, which governments are still against and, saying, oh, we can't do that. Meanwhile, we don't have any problem with the maritime people saying no more sulfur in shipping fuels and causing huge warming of the oceans, right? So it's kind of a bizarre situation at the moment, but I'm pretty sure, I can almost guarantee governments will deploy and use the solar management things, whether we like it or not. So they just better damn well make sure they know what they're doing, right? And do it right. So we better study it as much as possible and have open studies and open results on it and not say, oh, you can't study that. That's ridiculous, right? I'm thinking of the spraying of the aircraft carrier. So they put a little nozzle the nozzles on ski hills to make snow. They put one of those sort of things on an aircraft carrier to spray water, and the local city council where that aircraft carrier is docked, I don't think it's functional, shut it down. They said, oh, you can't do that, it's too controversial. Like, it's a joke, really. Like, it's crazy. It would be a joke, but it's so important that it's not a joke, right? It's just like bang your head against the wall.
Thanks a lot, Paul.
All right, we've got a number of hands raised, but I also want to respect some of the relevant questions from the chat. Kurt had put in the chat, how do we get the media to cover this?
And also how to be able to stop the fake news about it. That's another issue of it.
Yeah, well, the fake news is becoming a huge issue, especially with elections coming up. And then there's questions, how much did fake news affect previous elections? And, in Canada, there's a whole thing now about foreign interference, right? There's actually, I just read something about New York City had this massive parade, which turns out it was funded by the Chinese government, right? It was some parade of some sort. So, our world is interconnected, right? People are going to try to sway opinions in other countries, and there's nothing stopping them, and they have the mechanism on social media. So, so that's one whole issue, right? That whole issue is so, and it's interesting because this is nothing new. The idea of disinformation and fake news is nothing new to anybody in the climate field. Right? It's been going on for 40 years in the climate field, right? It started with, Exxon knew about climate change and they hid reports and then got the best PR companies in the world to promote fossil fuels and to downplay climate for many, many years. And, now with, of course, the widespread use of social media, it's gone to all other different aspects like elections and stories on, pick any topic, right? Like, it's almost like, also we're flooded with information. So how can an individual, filter what's important and what's not? I mean, as far as climate goes, there's certain publications, like I think Guardian, for example, does an excellent job on reporting climate change and new papers that have come out and stuff. But there's like the Washington Post is doing a lot better with climate stories. They used to be completely on the denial side, I think. New York Times also, but a lot of these are behind paywalls, which is another issue, right? So it's I don't know if I've really answered your question. I'm just agreeing. It makes things very complex.
I think I just put into the chat, one of the ways that governmentally we can possibly do something, and that's to get our government to have ranked choice voting. And there's also a big to do there in Canada. They're looking to be able to have ranked choice voting there. They call it something else. I forget what it is.
Yeah.
I'm gonna look
I
at
think it-
princesses.
Okay. Sorry about that. I'm muting stuff as it accidentally comes in. All right, if we're ready to move on, then James Finch had a question specifically about the UK. He says, in the UK, it's raining all the time, more flooding, and at the moment, the temperatures are low for this time of summer. They're saying a heat wave is on the way. James, I don't know if you had more to say about that, or we pass it to Paul.
Yeah. Okay. See if James wants to.
Yeah, it was just short. You mentioned the paper on tipping point, and I was going to ask you if there's a timeline of when it's going to end. If there's lose basically.
Right. So if the AMOC tips, well, there is a peer-reviewed paper. It doesn't really help, but I mean, it says that the tipping could occur anywhere between 2025 and 2095. So that's quite a range. I don't think it helps anybody. So there are early warning signs or early warning signals with the AMOC. So I'm going to talk about some of those based on a couple of peer-reviewed papers that have just come out in the last month. So that's probably going to be my next video. I was at a cottage doing some work for the last number of days, so had a little gap. Usually I try to get a video at every couple of days, but that's definitely highest on my priority list, to talk a bit more about the AMOC and some of the most recent research. And if you're on Twitter, you make sure you follow Stefan Ramsdorf. He's been studying the AMOC and ocean currents for years. So yeah, I mean, it's natural to think, well, maybe with all the rain and cold temperatures in the UK and parts of Europe, maybe the AMOC is on its last legs already, right? And it's still, it's the sort of thing. The problem is the AMOC, it's kind of a rear view thing. Like, it's like we don't know while we're going through it, maybe necessarily for sure, but when we look in the rear view mirror, yeah, like it's significantly cut down. I mean, we do have direct measurements of it, at various latitudes. I think 26.5 degrees north. There's a whole array of ocean buoys which measure the currents and so on at different depths. There's lots of Argo floats, thousands of them, which are these autonomous floats going up and down through the water column, sending their data to satellites. It's information on salinity and temperature. One of the signs that the AMOC is slowing is that the salinity would drop in the North Atlantic significantly, because more of the meltwater from the glaciers goes there. That's fresh water. There'd be less water carried northward, so the salinity would drop. So there's these different warning signs that people are looking at. And I just wanted to add, for the previous question, I just thought of, the way we have governments, you vote for a party and they might do 90% of the things you like and 10% of the things you hate and completely disagree with. So, maybe, we don't have to govern the way that we always have, right? We could vote, if the public in a country voted on an issue, right? So if the government was more issues based, right, then you wouldn't have the influence of lobbyists so much. You'd have more of the public voice. So, like, for example, the carbon tax, carbon price, or price on carbon in Canada, right? If we had everybody in Canada vote, say yes, we want it, no, we don't, right? Then it takes if you vote in a liberal government, you get it. If you vote in a conservative government, it's chopped, right? And normally, if the liberal government's in power for a few terms and they become very unpopular and people vote in the conservative government, and then we're just it's like rinse and repeat. Like, it's just like nothing seems to be done permanently, right? It depends on the whims of the politicians, and there's so much influence of lobbyists on politicians. Whoever pays them the most gets their policies in place, right? I mean, those sort of things, a lot of those sort of things could be maybe dealt with by having an issues-based political system where it's all issues, and the issues aren't tied to one party or another. I don't know. It's just fantasy probably, but anyway, good questions. Thanks.
All right, good stuff. Moving along. So we've got Jonathan next. And I'm not sure if George is still in the room. I'll have to check. He lowered his hand, but Jonathan.
I think Michael's trying to say something too. He can't seem to raise his hand though.
Oh,
I cannot raise my hand. I'm an neurodiverse. I don't understand how that works. And it doesn't give me a choice. And actually, Jamin, you told me I'm after Mark, and I was never after Mark.
Oh, I am so sorry, Michael. Why don't you go ahead and passing?
Okay, so Jamin, you know me. I'm fire, right? So I'm gonna fire up this around a little bit here. So what we saw with Mark McCormick, that he does already something. He does something, and he's not saying, okay, pointing out what doesn't work. It's very important that we have, like you, Paul, we have people that actually really try to human-centrically understand what they are actually researching. But where's always the disconnect between systems and humans? Where's the disconnect? Where we believing, oh, we gotta save the world. Everybody has no money on this world. Everybody's afraid not having money. It's never enough, no matter what we do. And so everybody's in fight flight. When you're in fight flight, scientifically, you know that you cannot think rationally. And what happened when that happens? How can you, and I felt your, what you kept saying is, yeah, and they don't do this, the disconnect, the strongest things that you said was there is a disconnect between the science and the humans participating. The humans want to participating, and when they did with recycling plastic, right? We found out now that 97% or 9% can only be recycled, and the rest is put into the trash in the earth. So the disconnect, we need to connect with human centric. And when we say, we all talk about climate change like a heart attack, like a high blood pressure, and that becomes a money for systems, because now is mental health is the next one. And the more I'm defining it, the more money I can make it, because I'm defining systemically a problem, and then I make money fixing that problem. And then because the financial principles are so faulty, it becomes more and more, it's never enough. And all of a sudden, with the good intent of the system to heal the heart attacks and all of these diseases, becomes a money machine. And therefore, the intent of helping us all is focused on a couple that make the money. So what I said is, when anybody says climate change, and then I'll say climate crisis, you know, they changed the vernacular, especially in Europe. When everybody says, oh, you know, we have a climate crisis, and people cannot take it anymore. They cannot take more shit. And the problem with that is that when you say, why don't we focus on, keep the climate change and the science do that, but everybody's human responsibility is not to pay more taxes. The responsibility for each human that are all one of one is we have human rights for life, for free speech, for whatever. We have responsibilities too. And one of our responsibility is clean water, clean air, and clean food, non-systemic changed altered food. When the systemically altered food is changed, it needs to be said, transparent. Because every human can do something, and they're connecting and say, yeah, I'm doing my thing, clean water, clean food, clean air. And then you have, as the maestro of the science, you have the connection, you know, instead of saying, okay, we take care of climate, we will do everything, but your part is clean water, clean air, clean food. Whatever happens, every county, every the tiniest city, somewhere in Canada in the woods, you are responsible for clean water, clean air, clean thing. You cannot burn tires in Canada, in the forest, because you're cold, you know? So, and we need to get this to kids right away and said, that's your responsibility. One, you have a right to speak your mind, but you also have the responsibility to harm to none and all the other stuff. And I think if we could do that, then we would be, it would transform the world, a human centricity. And I put my article in the things it's, you know, don't going from top down, but bottom up to meet top down.
Yeah, interestingly, First Nations people around the world understood this completely, and you know, our so-called advanced civilizations that subjugated them and took over their lands and basically run the show, we've forgotten all of those basics, and that's what you're saying. Yeah, I mean, I agree perfectly. So it's you know, and I mean, you know, I'm in Canada, and you know, we're very lucky in Canada. We've got loads of space and you know, very low population density. We've probably got more lakes than any other country on the planet. We've got all the, you know, fresh water, and we've got the forests, and you know, you know, we've got all those things. The clean air in general, except for when there's wildfires. The water is generally, you know, but there's issues there everywhere. I think one of the things that comes to mind is that these things are universal. Like, so the UN, they have their sustainability goals. They have each of these things covered. Maybe they have too many sustainability goals. Maybe they need to just focus on the key important ones. And I guess that brings to the question as to, you know, I think the UN is important, and they run the climate conferences, they have the COPs, they write the reports, but it's become so unwieldy, their reports and so on. And I guess their power is lacking, right? Their power is completely lacking. You know, people like the fact that the UN is there. We've had the League of Nations before the UN. So, you know, the idea of do we have governance on an international global scale? I mean, in Europe, of course, there's the EU, right? And the elections we were just having. So, you know, different places are, but they're lacking teeth and they're lacking power to actually say anything. I mean, you know, if they say things that countries don't like, then they're just ignored and said, oh, you guys are wrong, you know? I mean, I'm thinking, you know, I mean, the UN is saying a lot about the Gaza-Israel thing right now, and it's not favorable for Israel, right? But many countries are just saying, well, you guys are wrong, you know, you shouldn't be saying this, etc. It's all
And war
politicized.
pollutes, war pollutes, war pollutes.
Yeah,
Now,
yeah, I mean,
how we can ask, how we
yeah.
can ask money
Yeah.
and at the same, because we finance wars. It's paid
Yeah,
from our
no,
tax money.
I mean, the
So-
destruction of the number of buildings destroyed in God. I mean, will those ever be rebuilt? Think of the carbon embedded. Think of the carbon to rebuild any of those. In my neighborhood, I just filmed before this program. I just filmed the building being destroyed by a front end loader. You know, an old house. And you know what people are doing is they buy the property in Ottawa, and then they don't like the house, so they just bulldoze the house down, build a much bigger house covering the full lot. And, you know, I mean, they get away with that. City of Ottawa has a climate plan. You know, I'm going to contact them and say, hey, why, you know, are you like, this is a huge issue. If you have a 100-year-old house that's in decent shape, why the hell would you go and knock it down? If somebody doesn't like the house, they don't buy it. Like they should have, but right now people can buy the house and property and just raise the house, you know, just destroy the house and start again. And, you know, there's no climate sense in doing that sort of thing. So we're doing a lot of really stupid things, you know, as a society. And so thank you. Yeah, great. I love your backdrop, by the way. I don't know if that's wallpaper in your office or
My art. I'm an artist. That's my art. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
I
Thank
feel
you.
like all these people are looking at me. Are those eyeballs or something?
No, they're colospheres.
Okay. Anyway, it's very colorful. Great stuff. Thank you.
All right, good stuff. Next up is Jonathan, followed by Jack, followed by Dorota. Go ahead.
Hey, thanks. Hey, Paul, if you could talk about your own personal intuition on when, if at all, when are we going to see a cooling effect from our exit from the El Nino? And, you know, for myself, I'm looking for it around January. If I don't start to see a cooling effect from our exit from that, then I'm going to start considering that we're in some sort of a runaway heating situation that is not even based on the shift between El Nino and La Nina. But what do you think you're going to be looking for to see if that's the reason for our recent spike?
Yeah. So you know, if you remember, we had 3 years of very strong La Nina before we came into this El Nino, which appeared wasn't enormous, but it was, you know, pretty large, and then it's tapered, and now we're kind of in El neutral, you know, but we're, you know, heading back to another. So it's interesting because we've had these ENSO cycles for a long period of time, but they haven't always been a thing on this planet. So, you know, the big question is, you know, how does the ongoing climate change trends, how does that affect the ENSO cycle? And there's some arguments that it leads to more frequent, almost permanent, like El Nino cycles, you know, warming cycles, or it blunts them or something like that. So it's you know, what we're seeing, if you look at the global temperature, global average temperature, there's about 5 or 6 different groups that put it out. The GIST, Goddard Institute, and then there's Berkeley. There's other ones, right? There's about 5 of them, and they line up. If you look in more recent years, they line up very, very closely. They differ. They tend to differ more in previous years. They go back, 100, 120 years or something. So whenever we get a very strong El Nino on top of the warming trend is when we get, record global temperatures. So like I'm thinking 97, 98, 2012, 2013, or 2014, 2012, 2015, so whenever there's a powerful El Nino, it seems to push us on top of the trend, global warming trend underneath to record levels. And so we saw that again, but I think this is something different right now that we're seeing. I mean, the acceleration of global warming since 2010, from 0.18 degrees Celsius per decade to 0.36, and it could go even higher. If you look at James Hansen's work, he's attributing this to sulfur. I think he's right. So I think that I don't expect to see much of a tapering off from what the temperatures. We're on a tear. I mean, we're past 1.5. I think we're going to be past 2 degrees, within a decade or so, certainly the way we're heading. And people have to kind of see this and say, well, what the hell's going on? I mean, the only thing, most of us live in the Northern Hemisphere. So if the AMOC does actually shut down, people are going to say, wait, what happened to global warming? We got all this cooling. People are probably saying this in the UK right now. How come it's 12 degrees in the spring? Right? So, so I think, I mean, the effect of the El Nino and the ENSO, I think, is much, much less. I mean, and the media really pushes it and says, okay, it's cooling. It's they really how often do they talk about the sulfur? They should be talking about the sulfur, not ENSO.
So by what month will you have confirmation of your guess that the transition away from El Nino won't result in a cool down? Will it be, April of next year? When will you go,
I mean, there has to be some sort of cool down, but it might just be a lot smaller than people expect, maybe 0.1, 0.2 degrees, and then it'll start up again. So, over the next 6 months to a year, I think, we should know for sure, I think.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, good questions, everyone. Next up is Jack, followed by Dorota, followed by Maxime. Go ahead, Jack. And are you muted there, Jack?
Yeah, I thought I unmuted, but I guess I didn't. Well, anyway, thanks, Paul, for being here. Of course, this is great. Are you aware of a person named Greg Braden, who's kind of a scientist?
Brayton, did you say?
Greg Braden.
Braden.
Braden. I think Braden. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. No, I not offhand, but maybe what sort of work does he or what
Okay.
Are you wondering
so
about?
I'm gonna preface this that he is a high profile person. He's a scientist. He's been on programs like Humanities Team and the Shift Network, and he works with what's his name? Nassim Harrison, the person who's finally, I think, pretty much proved the field theory. I'm just trying to make a point that this isn't just somebody popping off. This is a high-profile person who's done events throughout the world for a lot of credible organizations. And the reason I bring him up is that he maintains, and I can't describe it exactly, but there's something going on in the center of the Earth. And something that has kind of a rotational thing. I don't know if it's kind of a not a lava thing, but molten thing. Anyway,
Yeah.
It rotates one way. It has a tendency to cool the Earth, and it rotates the other way. It has a tendency to warm the Earth. And so his claim, and like I say, this is a credible person in most senses, that global warming would be coming even if the people weren't putting the carbon and various things into the air. Although they may exacerbate. So you understand what I'm getting at?
Yeah,
have you
well,
ever heard
I'll have a look at his work. I think in the meantime, you're probably best to talk to some earth scientists, some geoscientists, some geologists who study the inner workings, the Earth core, and I mean, of course, we've got the tectonic plates that are all moving on we've got the iron core, molten or not, and all the different movements and so on, but generally people don't see that as the effects on the climate are mostly from things like volcanoes, right? When there's some rupture of the Earth's surface, it's not like the temperature of the ground. If you go down in a mine and monitor the temperature, it's extremely hot as you go deeper into mines, for example. Some of the deepest mines, you need air conditioning down there, otherwise people can't work at extracting the ore. So there's a lot. We do know quite a bit about how temperature changes with depth in the earth and so on, but how magnetic fields are generated, but I don't see too much mentioned on climate effects apart from volcanoes. And of course, continental drift has changed climate because it's changed where land masses are. So it's also opened up it's opened up a gap between Antarctica and South America. It closed the gap between North and South America, the Isthmus of, these are much longer scale effects. So I think a lot of effects with Earth tectonics and stuff are much longer time scale effects than something that we'd see right now causing warming. So yeah, I'd have to, apart from that, I'm not sure. I'll have a look at what he's saying. I don't discount things, out of hand. I always kind of try to look deeper and see if there's something behind it.
Yeah, so please do that, because this is somebody who, he researches various things throughout the world.
Yeah. Okay.
And he doesn't just spouting off. Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway,
okay. Thank you. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, Jack and Paul. And Paul, thank you for being so generous with your time and answering so many questions. Next up, we have Dorota.
Yes, hello, and thank you, Paul, for your videos. I'm a layperson, so I'm really grateful for them because they help me understand what's going on. And because I joined late, I also wanted to apologize. If somebody asks similar question, please stop me. I want to ask a personal question because I experience a lot of anxiety when it comes to seeing climate change, but also seeing social and political tensions, the rise of fascism, right? You talked about earlier about food shortages coming. I think there's some kind of preparation for, fascist militias kind of guarding certain resources and taking over resources. For a long time, I thought that central northern, because I live in the UK, I come from Poland originally, and I lived in the States for a while, but now I lived in the UK, and I always thought that central northern Europe would be the best to kind of, live.
Yeah.
I know you don't have a crystal ball, but do you have any kind of, feeling for where it could be the safest place for us to live in the coming decades?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's a great question. So, it's easier. I guess it's easier to think of maybe, what are the countries that could be most resilient to climate, right? Like I would say Central Europe is probably pretty good, but if the AMOC shuts down, then probably not so good anymore, right?
That's exactly what I'm thinking. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, you know, if you had, if you could choose anywhere on the planet to live, you know, I'm kind of lucky, I think, where I am in Canada. I think one of the biggest risks that we face in Canada is hordes of Americans coming north when they can no longer live in really, you know, in large parts of the country through lack of water, you know, heat waves, etc. So, you know, maybe Canada needs to build this wall, you know, to keep these hordes of Americans out. I don't know. You know, I always think that people that live on islands through, you know, are a bit more resilient. Maybe, you know, they think that. So I, you know, I'm thinking that you know, the island mentality. It's like you're more isolated. You're forced to be more resilient, maybe. So I'm thinking, you know, a place like New Zealand. I mean, if I was to move from Canada because of climate change, I think where would I go? I think a place like New Zealand might be you know, high up on my list of choices. But it's, you know, in Canada, we have such a low population density, right? We can always, you know, move further north, but then it's harder to grow things because the soils aren't developed, right? You don't get good soils because you just have, you know, coniferous trees in the far north, lots of rock, Canadian Shield, right? You know, soils aren't developed that thick from fir trees and coniferous trees. They're developed thicker from deciduous trees with the leaves falling, you know, decomposing, building up the soils. So it's not, you know, there's all kinds of different factors, and you know, you know, what's the time frame on these things happening, right? I mean, you know, if I had to guess, you know, if the AMOC failed within, say, if it failed within 30 years, would I be surprised? Not really. If it failed within 10 years, would I be surprised? Yeah, probably. I mean, that's very rapid. It's dropped 30% in, you know, if it continued at that rate, you know, it's still going to be a while. So it's hard to say, really. It's hard to change, you know, to think that our neighborhoods, etc., will be you know, won't be viable, like, right? It's a very difficult question. So yeah, yeah, it's a good question. But I mean, you know, it's sort of, you know, as people have, you need water, you need food, right? You want to have some sense of order, right? I mean, the problem is that you know, we think with our politicians and so on that, like, it looks like things are turning to total chaos in some places, right? So, you know, it depends on you know, and each country is differently prepared for, you know, hardship. You know, some countries are very wealthy, other countries, I mean, already, you know, the sort of the countries in the world that have unstable governments, that don't have resources, you know, that don't have money, poor countries, right? They're suffering terribly through climate change. I mean, I wouldn't recommend moving to India, you know, for example, right? So it's easier to think of places that are you know, that you don't want to be, rather than to think of places where you do want to be. So
Thank you.
but you know, with the climate anxiety, try to narrow it down and figure out, you know, are you worried about not having enough food to eat? Are you worried about your place being flooded? Are you worried, like, what aspects? Try to think of narrowing it down, and then you know, also, you know, worry doesn't really get us anywhere, right? Unless it causes some sort of change. You know, so look at some, you know, small things maybe, that, like, is there a climate group in your community? Do you have like-minded people? Are you, you know, at least talking about the problem without having solutions really helps from, you know, keeping good emotional, you know, emotional stability. Go to a good movie, play with kids, get a puppy, you know, do all those things. You got to have a lot of self-care, you know, and just turn it off. I went up to a cottage and I fixed a boat, and you know, did some you know, did some repairs on things, and I forgot completely all about climate change in spite of this good group trying to contact me, getting me to do stuff. You know, I said, I'll appear on Thursday, but I'm pretty much offline. You know, so just go offline. Don't get rid of your phone for a week, right? And just go and see friends and, you know, go to movies and have a good dinner and, you know, do stuff like that just for a week. It's like the world isn't going to disappear, hopefully, in a week, right? You don't need all that news that you're always constantly getting. Well, I guess I do in a way if I'm doing videos and stuff like that, but you know, not all the time. You gotta, you know, nobody understands your emotional state better than you do. So, you know, take charge of it and do what you need to do to you know, keep, because you don't know, you know, if you get depressed and, you know, then you can't do much of anything, right? So there's no point in that. Easier said than done, but you know, and you go through all ups and downs. I listened to this, there's a show in Canada called there's a guy called John Tesh who's full of advice. He says if you're in a negative state and you're down, then turn it around. He said if you actually poke your teeth with a toothpick and cause your lips to curl, then the actual action of your lips curling then generates endorphins, because those are the muscles that are used when you do a smile, and it immediately uplifts your mood. So if you're feeling really down, take a toothpick and start poking at your teeth, causing your smile, your lips to move into a smile, and that should stimulate feedback. I don't know if it works, but it's you know, I'm not the best one for advice on that, but
Thank you very much.
anyway, I'll try that with the toothpick myself.
All right. Very good.
I think it would work for me if I poke somebody else with the toothpick. Then I'd start laughing. Right?
All right. Very good. All right. Well, I'm going to poke Maxime. You've been very patient. Go for it, Maxime.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep, perfect.
Okay, first I want to say thank you, Paul. I've been following your work for a while. I think you do a great job of taking the complex system that is the climate and explaining these non-intuitive interactions. So thank you for that. My question is, I've recently found a group of people, former mineral and petroleum experts, who are claiming that they're kind of adjacent, or there's a little bit of intersection with them with limits to growth folks. And they're claiming, like, you know, peak oil has happened in 2018, probably, and that the future is a greater simplification. Like there's a reduction of energy supply and the world's gonna be forced off oil anyway. Is there any credibility to this idea, this theory? And because I'm kind of skeptical, right, because of these people's backgrounds.
Yeah.
Is there any credibility to it, and what effect would it have on climate and the kind of the ecological crisis we're in?
Yeah, yeah, good questions. I know that there was the International Energy Agency was just saying yesterday, I believe, that we're going to have a glut of oil in the near-term future because of collapsing demand. I don't know how valid that is, but I mean, they're you know, they're people that are monitoring that, and they had some, they put out a series of reports, and there's a couple on renewables and things like that. You know, of course, with the mining and stuff, you know, it's always like look, we have 1.5 billion cars on the planet right now, and that's about the same. We have the 1.5 billion livestock, so cows and you know, beef cattle and so on. You know, if we're talking about replacing cars with electric cars, surely we're not talking about building 1.5 billion electric cars, right? Do we even have enough lithium and cobalt and precious metals and things to produce the batteries and stuff to do that, as well as for the wind turbines, et cetera? So, you know, it comes down to, you know, materials and where we get them from. You know, and we've relied on a lot, like most of the cobalt, for example, comes from Africa, right? Belgium, Congo, I believe. You know, there are a lot of mines in the US where they haven't been able to get permits, and they haven't where there's huge amounts of lithium and some of the, I mean, lithium is probably one of the limiting minerals for the clean energy revolution, if you like. So there's all of these sort of practical questions. And I think, we do know that, clean energy has grown in leaps and bounds. But, are we really thinking of, like I said, building 1.5 billion electric cars? I mean, most people's their car sits in their garage for 95% of the time, 95, it's just sitting there. So, do we need that sort of, does everybody need an individual private car? Think that, what if there was like 10% of those numbers of cars on the planet? People didn't own cars, they just dialed up on their phone and a car appeared, whether it be full self-driving or whatever. I mean, right, we would need far fewer cars. There would be no longer traffic jams. People could have staggered work hours, and we could have a much cleaner, like the Paris Olympics is coming up and they're cleaning the air in Paris. They cleaned the air. It's 40% cleaner than it was a couple weeks ago or a month ago. Why? Because they've banned cars in downtown areas, right? So, we can do stuff if we want. It's just that we haven't been at that stage. I guess desperation, about climate hasn't been large enough to force us to do these. We can get those scientists and engineers that work for making military armaments. I'm talking about the US mostly, but other countries. And we can say, guys, just work on renewables for the next year or two. We got enough stuff, it's not going to disappear. It's in the warehouses. We can kill the planet many times over with our military stuff. So let's actually build stuff that will, create a clean energy society and remove carbon from the atmosphere, and perhaps do some solar SOS, solar optimizing solutions or systems to cause some cooling, to buy us some time to do all these other things so we don't tip over into a totally chaotic, unstable climate, right? So it's just, we have agency as humans, right? And we're not using it. We tend to feel trapped in, the way we want to do things the way we've always done things. And so that's the question. How many cars should we be building? How many clean electric cars around the globe should we be building? Do we have any plan on a global basis? Not really. It's just country to country, company to company even, right? So we can do a lot better, that's for sure.
All right, good stuff. Well, Paul, you're super generous with your time. You're welcome to stay here as long as you want.
I figure, everybody's probably getting tired of me. So, maybe
I'm not.
10 or 15 minutes. And I can, how many questions are outstanding? I guess, let me ask you that.
Well, I just raised my hand. I waited for all the hands to go down, and then I raised my hand. I've got a question. And then I saw Melissa raised her hand, but then lowered it. So why don't we, let's just make sure. And so you're saying another 10, 15 minutes. I think that's
and then probably wind up, and we can tell everybody to watch my Twitter feed and my Facebook, etc. We'll do another session on something, in a couple of weeks, maybe try for a couple of months or something.
Sure.
I think this is well worth doing because people aren't just watching a video, right? They can get their questions in, and it could be more interactive. So
yeah, well, I love it, and I know I speak for the whole group that's worked to put this together. We love this. We love you, Paul, and we love all.
Well, I know. See, the thing, I know you have incredible stamina, right? And you guys can be on video channels for like 8 hours and stuff on your Friday parties or whatever. So if I'm doing a lot of the talking, I'll have to go and have a coffee or something soon. So so let's go for another bit.
Okay. So my question, Paul, is around the rate of overheating. So you've got heat, and then you've got temperature, two very different things. Heat being hey there, Peter. Heat being a physical substance, a thing, right? It's invisible, but it is a thing. It's as much of a thing as matter. And then you have temperature, which is a metric on that thing. And I believe that there's way too much emphasis on temperature, which is I see as a lagging indicator. I think the leading indicator is how much heat, whether you measure it in zettajoules or watts per square meter, which is much more tangible. My understanding from browsing James Hansen's articles is that we're in the ballpark of 2 to 3 watts per square meter, global average rate of overheating, of energy imbalance right now, and that number has been increasing partly because of the loss of the sulfur from the maritime dirty fuels, et cetera. But no matter how you slice it, we've been on this upward trajectory of heat accumulation, and that seems just absolutely unsustainable. And the only real practical antidote to that I can fathom is SOS, as you say. And so my question to you, if you had mentioned, China being, communist, therefore they can just mandate stuff. If you were Emperor Paul Beckwith, Emperor of the planet, and whatever you said, everyone just did it. Like, what would you mandate for humanity and for the planet?
Yeah, well, first of all, you're absolutely right about the temperature, right? Because heat is much more fundamental. So we know like 90% plus of the heating of the planet is heating of the ocean. Now, of course, heat content depends on the material that is at a certain temperature. So, when we talk about, it's mostly air temperature we're looking at, right? Because we live and we can feel temperature. Everybody understands temperature. But, I mean, the heat content in the ocean, if it's the same temperature as the air, is way, way higher, of course, because of the heat capacity of that material. And water, it's what, 1,000 times difference or something, density difference between water to air. So we're talking about 1,000 times more heat, in a volume of water with a certain temperature than air, even more so than ground, than earth or metals or rock or anything else. So yeah, you're absolutely right. It's just, I guess it's, and I think a lot of the work that Hansen specifically does, he's always keeping that in mind with the heat. So that's an important point, but it's not so intuitive for us, right? Us humans. If I was like the benevolent emperor dictator of the world, I think we could get tremendous changes very quickly if people listened. I mean, slashing fossil fuels is, of course, a no-brainer. I'd take all of the scientists and engineers and around the planet that are working on military stuff and say, what, just stop doing that for a year. You got enough weapons, right? Nobody else is going to be developing their militaries because all those people are also working on climate related stuff, on renewables, on carbon capture. We could actually make huge progress. It's not a limitation of money. It's just a limitation of what people, of our society, what we're directing people to do, right? What we're treating, with more priority than with things we should. I mean, we're basically, we got to remember that the Earth is like a spaceship moving through space, right? I mean, life means that it's not a bare rock moving through space like an asteroid or, the moon or something, our governments that we've elected are doing policies that are actually reducing the resilience of our life support system, right? We're actually knocking out big chunks of our life support system, and not kind of planning and thinking, well, hey, if we knock out, we're thinking we can do this in an unlimited fashion, right? We think that the Earth is so vast and our support systems are so good, but we don't recognize that there's tipping points and we can actually hit the wrong lever and cut off the life support systems, and then the whole planet suffers, right? So all the signs are there. So just recognize. I mean, I like James Lovelock with his Gaia work, was very, very very crucial. I mean, he's a person I have huge respect for. My favorite climate scientist personality, of course, is James Hansen at the moment. And his work is incredible. So make sure you see all of, you keep up to date with all of his work and what he says. So so I'm talking, carbon removal from the atmosphere ocean system doesn't matter if you remove carbon from the atmosphere or the ocean, it's going to go down in both if you do one, because there's a dynamic interplay. Might be a lot easier to take carbon out of the oceans. So I think one of the biggest things I like for carbon removal is phytoplankton. Phytoplankton are so widespread, and restoring the biodiversity of the oceans, I think, would be crucial. We've lost 90% of the large marine creatures in the oceans. Parts of the oceans, we're creating larger and larger dead zones, and we can reverse that. And if we need to put iron into regions of the ocean to stimulate phytoplankton, which work their way up the food chain, then these ideas of ocean pasture restoration, I think, are key and probably the easiest ways to remove vast amounts of carbon from the ocean atmosphere system. And I coined the phrase SOS for solar optimization systems. We got to get over our hang up for saying we're going to screw things up if we do anything. We can't even do any research in this area. On one hand, and on the other hand, we have an organization that wants to reduce air pollution deaths. So they take sulfur out of shipping fuels that have been there, and the oceans have suddenly warmed up tremendously. So, I mean, we know enough about things, cause and effect, that we need to do something about the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change in the UN. Like, they're so bureaucratic now. I mean, a report every 7 or 8 years, that's 7,000 pages long, all in, right? Nobody's going to read it. It's not going to have any impact. So, we need updates, every single year. Don't write a whole new report, just put in what's changed and how worse things are going, because there's no way we can deal with climate change that's happening much faster than they can generate these reports, right? So, and recognize, well, hey, we're heading to a global food supply because of our climate disruption. So what are we going to do about it? Right? Have more wars, put the resources elsewhere. Talk about Taylor Swift. What other diversions are we going to do to ignore, dealing with the problems that we're steamrolling towards, which is, we all have to eat. So.
All right, very good. Thank you, Paul. Well, I'm going to ask James to, since he's hosting us here and he opened up, for him to kind of wind us down a bit, and then there's still a couple of hands up, but that's totally up to whoever wants to stick around. We can all stick around. Let's let Paul off the hook. He's been very generous with his time and done a great job answering our questions today. So I'm going to pass it to James, and then Paul.
And just a reminder, this was our first session, so we had some hiccups at the beginning. We didn't start right on time, so hopefully we'll get all these guys to do all that stuff, and then half an hour before we schedule the next one to start. So we'll do this again in a few weeks or so.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, Paul. I'm right there with you. We actually started an hour early. The thing is, it was kind of short notice for all of us, and we kind of assumed the worst about Zoom bombers, so we overprotected and really armed up, did our own arms race against the Zoom bombers. It turned out to be way
I only gave these guys like a day's notice. I was at the cottage and I said, hey, why don't we just do this? I had no idea so much was involved. So thank you everybody, organizing this for, because I had a session. I gave a talk to KCOR, Canadian Club of Rome, and they said, don't share the Zoom link. And I said, well, I'll share it, get more people to come. And I did, and it was completely unworkable because you had all these Zoom bombers, so-called Zoom bombers, come in and nothing worked. They had to create a new link and start from scratch, and we started half an hour late. So, Zoom is great, but you do have to figure out, hopefully the company figures out how to deal with things and makes it easier for for the administrators to, you know, I mean, you got to create a room, vet everybody, send them another room. And I mean, you seem to have got it worked out. You've done this before, but there's still hiccups. But anyway, thank you to the team for putting this together. So, and
Well,
thank you for attending, the people that have been asking questions and watching.
Here. Thanks to everyone. And on behalf of all of us, it's our pleasure, Paul, and our honor. And we would love to do this as many times as you would like. And hopefully this can grow and evolve into something. I know James has some thoughts in that department. So I'm just going to pass it to James, and thank you once again to Paul and to everyone who volunteered and to everyone who's participated. Thank you. Go ahead, James.
Yeah, thanks, Jim, and thanks everyone. As most especially, thank you, Paul. First of all, you are very generous with your time. Not only that, you see the benefit of what we're doing. Everyone here, I imagine, and anyone that will view the recording later will see what we're talking about and the benefits of actually coming together in conversation and to get to the reality of our predicament, basically. Because as you described it, it is a predicament where we seem to be doomed if we do and don't. Systems aren't working right. The natural systems are going out of whack, but our organization systems and the global systems, man-made systems are, they've been out of whack for a long time and they're only getting worse now anyway. So I just wanted to say thank you for everybody for coming here today. I hope that you'll all join us, and even more will join us in the next session around. As you said, we were a little short notice getting organized for this one, but we're learning as we go. It's a learning process, and I'm sure we'll get the other issues sorted out. But yeah, I'll just leave it at that. Thank you all from Ireland, from Cork City here in Ireland, and to all of you all over the world. And that is the beauty of this as well. This is not, this is an international thing. It can be an international thing. If you're genuinely worried or concerned about, the global warming issues or anything connected to that, by all means, this is the place to come to. Well, these question and answers with yourself, Paul, are ideal places for the average person to find out what's the reality of our situation. I won't go on anymore. Just thank you very much. God bless everyone.
Okay, thank you. Goodbye.
Thanks, Paul. Take care.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Paul. Appreciate you.
And everyone's
Thanks,
welcome
Paul.
to stick around. Nobody needs to leave. Stick around as long as you'd like. We can chat it up. Now that the teacher has left the room, we can enjoy each other. So anyone who wants to speak, just raise your hand and pipe up. I know Melissa and BJ, you had questions. BJ, I'm not even sure you're here anymore, so sorry about that. And Melissa, go ahead. Yeah, James. Yeah.
Question. Oh, James. Sorry.
Oh, I'm just jumping in quickly, Melissa. My apologies, but I'm aware of the recording. Should we